Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Talk podcast presented by ACLT. My name is Callum, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined by someone who I hold in really high esteem, someone that I think many people hold in high esteem. And after watching this, I think you will too. I'm joined by the author of the Sickle Cell Guide, Mr. Kye Gbangbola. Sit back, relax. We're going to speak about it now. So, Kye, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Callum. Thank you for that very positive introduction.
I'll collect my payment from you later, but no, everything I said there was from the heart. I've had the honor of actually reading your book. I've got it here, so we are going to speak about this, but we also want to speak about you as well and your inspiration behind writing this book, etc. And I think there's a lot to talk about because you've done a lot of great things. But I have to start off by going slightly off tangent. You're a man with an afro. I'm a man with an afro. Yours looks a lot better than mine. I've got to ask you, the beard's looking very, very good as well. What's your secret to that? Because I always get cussed in the office by my colleagues, especially Bev and Jen. What's the secret behind the afro looking so sleek?
I think I couldn't agree with that particular point, but I can say I sport various hairstyles, as is the African tradition in many ways. And so this is what I'm sporting at this particular moment in time. And I just try and look after things as best as possible, as we all do.
You're doing a better job off camera. I think I'm going to ask for some tips on products, etc., to use. But look, let's get into the crux of why we've got you here today. We're going to be speaking about sickle cell disorder. So, can you just give the people an overview of what sickle cell disorder is, please, from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So sickle cell gives you a really good afro. No, I'm joking. Sickle cell disorder is it's amazing in many ways. It's an awesome and highly successful gene mutation. And I'm going to give you a fuller explanation because it requires that at this point in time. So it's awesome because it gives you that highly successful, it comes from that highly successful gene mutation. And it's highly successful. It affects over 300 million, I'll say that again, 300 million people on our planet. And this comes from the World Health Organization. You'll see it in my book. Mutation affords an element of protection from malaria. That's why it's awesome. It's not too dissimilar to the kind of immunity that you get when you take a COVID vaccine. So it's not total prevention, but it's going to stop you from coming to some serious harm. So that's what it's about. However, if the sickle cell gene is inherited from both parents, then that can lead to sickle cell disorder. And sickle cell disorder is a lifelong condition. It's invisible. And what that means is that you can't tell whether a person has it, even though it has a devastating impact on that person and on that person's family's quality of life. There's 300,000 babies that are born each year in sub-Saharan Africa, and many don't live until the age of up until the age of 5. But there's also 3% of white people that have sickle cell disorder. And that's because, being absolutely clear, it's a genetic condition. And so it is the point I made earlier about how people with different genotypes come together. Sickle cell disorder is the world's most common genetic blood disorder. It affects how oxygen is carried around the body. Regular blood transfusions and essentially they're often required to try and keep people well. A high proportion of people with sickle cell also suffer disability, and that disability are things like stroke, damage to bones, damage to joints, and damage to vital organs, and this can lead to organ failure. Sickle cell is a seriously life-limiting condition. And I may touch upon that a bit earlier, but life expectancy can be a bit low. Just as I said, sub-Saharan Africa, 4 in 5 babies born with sickle cell die before the age of 5. Now, the global figure is, and again, WHO information, World Health Organization information, and this is very sad in terms of you're likely to die, or I should say 50 to 80% likelihood of dying before your 18th birthday. And I can remember being told many a time, you won't live to be 18. Sickle cell is the world's fastest growing inherited condition. In people with sickle cell disorder, the red blood cells, they change shape. They have a sickle shape, like a crescent moon, which is a rather beautiful but apt description. Now, in this sickle form, the red blood cells get stickier and they stick together, as well as sticking to small blood vessels. And those small blood vessels in any part of the body where blood flows can result in excruciating pain. And this pain is likened to being relentlessly axed and hammered. And many mothers that have sickle cell have commented that the pain is worse with a sickle cell crisis, which is a pain episode, a crisis, than childbirth.
Wow.
Now, sickle cell disorder is also known as a fluctuating condition, meaning that for some, there are periods when they seem otherwise very well and they function as though they're completely unaffected by any kind of an illness. The crucial thing to note is if you've met one person with sickle cell, you've only met one person with sickle cell, because the impact of the condition just differs so widely across different people. And it also is impacted by one's medico-socio-economic status. In other words, let's put this simply, wealth matters in terms of how you sit with sickle cell. Sickle cell is absolutely genetic. There's people in Sicily that have a significant amount, and they're white people in Sicily, that have a significant amount of sickle cells, up to 12% of the population. And this is because we have been, as Black people, have been very successful in moving across the diaspora, and especially in areas of malaria, we're going to survive better than most. And so across that Mediterranean, traveling up through the lands that Marco Polo used to travel, you'll find people have traded out of Africa for many centuries. So always remember, health is so much more than a medical matter. It's a very interesting matter, especially with regards to sickle cell, and a powerful message that you will see throughout my book.
You say there's a lot to digest there. For me, I think the thing that really sticks out, and we spoke about this briefly, was the figure where you just mentioned, and in your book you reference this as well. 300,000, half of the 300,000 children in Nigeria unfortunately pass away before their 5th birthday. With statistics like this, how important is it for you and for many others to sort of start to become a resolution for some of these developing and vulnerable countries?
It's vital. We sit here and it's difficult in every country, but we always have to look at places with such stark statistics. If you are born in sub-Saharan Africa, 4 in 5 of those children will not reach the age of 5. And this is preventable. When there is a condition that is preventable, we have to address it. The first and the father of molecular medicine was a chap called Linus Pauling, 1954. And the highest on the agenda at that time was sickle cell. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize for it, Callum. You can imagine a person studying sickle cell wins the Nobel Peace Prize. So you would have always thought sickle cell would be high on the agenda. And we've got to keep it high on the agenda if we're going to address and look after and care for our brothers and sisters all around the world. But also, we have to strive to have that more level playing field so that we can also support people in other countries and in Africa. Just all countries where they're developing.
Another thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned previously when you were describing and talking about sickle cell, 3%, I think you said, of people living with sickle cell disorder are white. That to me is, again, is a bit of a shock, because I think in the media, in the wider space of people who don't know too much about the condition, everyone assumes it just affects Black people or people of Black heritage. Is there an onus on all of us to sort of spread more awareness about that it's not just a Black problem, it also affects other races as well?
Great point. We live in a world where there is increasing homogeneity. People are mixing together. As a consequence of that, the demograph is shifting, and there are more and more white babies being born with sickle cell disorder, more and more white babies that have the genetics as carriers of the trait for sickle cell. So we have to get across to everybody around us, especially our clinicians, medical professionals, that this is for all of our futures. We need to stop looking at this as a condition that just affects Black people and understand that it affects all of us. And if it's the fastest growing genetic condition, it's incumbent upon all of us to understand that we need to find the ways in order to ensure people have the right quality of life, because it's it affects all of us. We can't look at it as a diverse issue that's over there and walk on by. Okay, we have to look at it as something that affects all of us. It's the mentality that we saw with COVID.
Yes,
we saw the mentality. It's not necessarily what got delivered, but we saw the mentality that we're all in this together. The reality of the word all in this is together is that some people are in it with a boat and other people are in the sea. And we need to get everybody to the boats. Right.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, to be honest, because you saw how everyone sort of galvanized and grouped together during the pandemic. And if only us as human beings could do that with many more situations, then the world would be a better place. But instead of digressing, I'm going to ask you a few more questions here. I hear of many people spending months researching, saying they want a cure for their loved one. Is this one of the reasons you put pen to paper? And what was the main reason that made you want to write a book about sickle cell?
It was one of the main reasons. I saw families spending months and months and months researching. And when you do lots of research, your head's ablaze with, do I go in this direction? Do I go in that direction? So if you can write something that puts everything in one place at one time, you can read through the options. That cuts down on the precious time that it takes to research and make your decision, and hopefully will enable you to come to a position sooner rather than later. So that was an important element. The main important element is that I grew up at a time, I was born in the 60s, so I'm an old man now. And as I grew up in a time when people said things like, it's growing pains, or worse. Sometimes you might get a bit of a smack for misbehaving, as people would have thought of it. So as I was growing up, I began
to cut you there. Sorry to cut you there, Kye. I remember vividly reading in the book, you even spoke about this. You dedicated a chapter, a very short chapter, but speaking on how people would often coil this as a curse of some sort, and people just didn't take the pain seriously. so how did that affect you? Sorry to go off on a slight tangent,
That's
because
a,
I
that's a
read that, and that stuff for me is kind of heartbreaking. I've got two young kids, and
yeah.
I wouldn't have just hearing them in agony is just it's chilling. So for you to
Yeah, well,
actually go
this
through
is
what
what
you went through and hear
conversations are
people
all
say that,
about,
I
Callum.
wouldn't.
In many ways, you know,
Yeah,
that you just got to come in at these points
yeah,
whilst it's there and you're
yeah,
feeling it. And you know, a lot of people have changed. When I was younger, you would never find a man pushing a child in a pushchair.
mm,
We interrelate to our children really quite different today, and that's a blessing. And
yes,
when with the situation that I discuss in the book in terms of stigma and some people consider it a curse, I can tell you, you can pick up your phone or your device, go onto YouTube, listen to people, and they will tell you those same stories today of how
mm,
they grew up and had people around them that said, Ebeku, and this is there were discussions about children that come and go. That's just the way it is. The keep away from these types of people. It's not nice, but we have moved on in time.
mm,
Um, I take no umbrance because we always have to think that was then, and you know, thank God this is now. Right?
definitely, yeah,
And people are learning, and people that are good mothers and fathers such as yourself will be able to convey and show their children how to interact a lot better and understand a lot better. And that brings me straight back to your question, why did I write this book? Well, there was no book for me when I was growing up. I needed this book. I needed to read
yeah,
something that told me about people like myself. I never met anyone like myself when I was younger. I
yeah,
didn't know that other people like me existed. Well, with a book like this, one, you begin to understand that this is a thing. It's a real thing. It's not your fault, you know, because you can sometimes say, "Oh, so different from everyone. Is something wrong with me?" No, we've got to bring people up. They're not defined by their condition. It's not their fault. And
yes,
then we provide solutions, reinforce people, make them more resilient. And I wanted to do this for the children because at the Sickle Cell Society, that where I was chair for nearly a decade, we've
yeah,
always had the children's holiday going right back to 1988. And what I loved about being with the children there, and we had last holiday 64 children, you know, and some
wow,
of those children say, I never
amazing,
met anyone with sickle cell. And to be able to say to them, you're not defined by your condition. Look, here, talk to these people. These are role models going into the future. You can do all these things, you know. Sometimes people might want to wrap you up in cotton wool, but there's strategies, there's coping mechanisms to enable you to achieve whatever potential anyone else could dream of or seek to achieve. So the book was written for everybody. The book was also written because many doctors, you know, say, I can't understand these guys and gals. I just don't under. It's cultural problems.
yeah,
This came out of a global survey called Shape. So not just everything I'm talking about, I can back up. So
yeah,
this came out of a global survey. Can't understand. It's because cultural differences. These cultural differences were being utilized as the reason why there is substandard care in medicine. And there is no excuse for not giving people things like pain relief. So the book needed to be written to bring these people together with a one understanding of we are all people. The point you make, Alan, at the end of the
yeah,
day, we are human beings, okay? And there's no reason to look askant at us. We're all trying to make our way, and there's means of ensuring our comfort if we become unwell so that we can get better as quickly as possible and move on. We need to also have the treatments that enable that to happen. And that is somewhat another question, but I mentioned Linus Pauling, Nobel Peace Prize winning, sickle cell high on the agenda. And then you have to look at the disparity and ask yourself, why is it that sickle cell currently has 6 approved treatments, whereas cystic fibrosis has 511? Say that again. 6
Yeah.
against 511 approved treatments.
Mind-boggling.
That's the nature of disparity. And I always emphasize when I make this point, this is never about pulling anyone else down. It's simply about saying, I have to stand up and say, what about us?
Yes.
You know, what about us? We should all be working together to make sure that we have that appropriate balance.
I completely agree. And you mentioned the word in what you were saying there, define. And one of the first quotes I got from the book, and I quote from the book, my hope is to inspire my fellow sickle cell warriors to understand the condition, not be defined by it. Now, growing up, this couldn't have been easy for you. It wasn't easy for you, let's be honest. But when did this sentence that you've written in the book really start to resonate with you? When did you start to live life through this sentence?
For me personally, it was always at the forefront of my mind. How could I possibly have a successful life? And it was clear that I couldn't allow the condition to define me. For my interactions with the world around me,
Mm.
it took on a higher importance when I was able to observe that there were many children that felt downbeaten, trodden upon, and totally everywhere they looked, hemmed in by a medical view or a social view, or the people around them every day saying, you know, you have to be kind of like this way. We've got to kind of put you inside this kind of box, and they couldn't just live their lives. And it was important to then show by positive example, you don't have to be defined by your condition. Take a look around you. These people are put before you. They're not defined by their condition, but you
Yeah.
have to respect it. That's the reality.
Yeah.
You respect it and you utilize the best of whatever you can from the learning. Look at the resilience that you have to have just to get through life with something like that.
Yeah.
You can utilize that in so many different ways. And essentially, that's what I've tried to do through my life. I know that everybody is different. I emphasize it at the top of this. If you meet one person with sickle cell, you've only met one person with sickle cell. But you know what? As human beings, we can all help each other. Okay. If there's one thing that human beings, both mentally, psychologically, and physically appreciate, is someone that can help them. And if everybody's willing to support one another, sharing is the key thing that I teach in with one of my other expert hats. If there was less greed on this planet, it would be such a far better place. And it's just the inability of people to share. So I encourage, through my business knowledge and through my direct experience, that we share between one another. And that sharing means I need to share with people, you're not defined. Don't ever be defined.
Yeah.
And if you ever feel like that, have some conversations, and then we'll together move beyond.
Very well said. Going back to the book, on page 31 of the book, you describe an instance where you received less than adequate medical care during a crisis. Obviously, you explained earlier on in this interview what a crisis is, an episode of pain. Can you elaborate on your feelings during and after this situation, and how it affected your trust in the medical practice and personnel who treated you or didn't treat you as they should have at the time?
So I've always said, and I've participated in various things, and one of the places I participated in which we were leading, which was called the Sickle Cell Inquiry in Parliament. And part of that inquiry, I was called to give evidence. And I said that if I ever die, it's likely to be because I've been unwell, I've gone into hospital, and the care was poor. Okay, so the experience I relate on page 31 is common to me, it's common to many.
Yeah.
And the reason I gave to Parliament was, you see, I have particular immutable characteristics. I'm a black man, okay? And that doesn't necessarily go down too well when you consider that there is a degree of kind of race bias in
Yeah.
some environments. And you look at the studies again, there's the shape study that was done. And there's a further study. Let me just recall it now. It's called SWAY. SWAY is the Sickle Cell World Assessment Survey. 40% of patients with sickle cell avoid the trauma of poor care from medical professionals. 40%. You've got what is called sickle cell is a medical emergency.
Yeah.
A medical emergency, to give you the comparator, is a heart attack and a stroke. Okay, they're medical emergencies.
Yeah.
Sickle cell is a medical emergency. The same blue light time for a sickle cell crisis. So you begin to understand that my experience is one of I I have to take on board that trauma. When someone with sickle cell goes to hospital, they literally are at a point where they're saying, I have to put my life in other people's hands.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you, Kai. I was just going to ask that. Does the fact that you've just said that is, again, it blows my mind. But does that make you, and again, I know you can't speak for everyone who's a sickle cell warrior, but does that make you more hesitant to go to hospital? Therefore, do you leave it longer while you're going through a crisis, and then doesn't that have an effect on you as well?
Total avoidance. I said in the parliamentary inquiry, I avoid going to hospital. If I can avoid going to hospital, I will not go to hospital. Last time I went to hospital, I ended up in ITU, intensive care. It took 11 times longer than the commissioning time for providing pain relief. The commissioning times identified in a document by NICE called CG143. I know it chapter and verse. I'm carrying a piece of paper that says who I am, why I'm there, and how to treat me.
Yeah.
11 times longer. And of course, the longer, as I highlight in my book, the longer you are without any kind of pain relief, the more destruction is going on inside your body. And as I said to the inquiry, what happens to people with sickle cell is you can get to a point where your body is not going to recover. It doesn't matter what anyone does for you. Don't matter who suddenly pops up on the scene. You've gone too far. Your body is not going to recover from that trauma. So it's, again, we go back to what is the reason behind this book? How do I feel being put in those situations? I pray that I come through,
Yeah.
and I write the book because this kind of thing shouldn't happen. I've been on various occasions called to speak with TV stations about how a patient has experienced these things. And I will say to them, there should never, ever be a time. Say to the TV, there should never be a time when a person has to beg for pain relief because of the condition, a known condition that they're suffering. But it happens time and time again. So the purpose of a lot of this research is to make that connection with healthcare staff. We're in a situation where these clinical encounters have to be more respectful. They have to give the same value that they give to other people from other groups in society. When that happens, there will be a reduction in the statement of substandard care is being given to sickle cell patients. But this is coming more and more to the fore in various articles. But it's not nice, Callum. It's not nice
Yeah.
being in that situation. But when you've lived with it for the whole of your life, what do? You roll with the punches essentially, and hope that this isn't your day.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to roll with the punches though. That's the problem. So again,
It is.
it brings me on to the next question. What, in your opinion, might improve quality and patient safety for sickle cell warriors? Because it seems like that standard's not being met at the moment.
Yeah, so we tend to set standards, okay, but without proper equity, representation, inclusion, transparency,
Mhm.
accountability, and leadership. So I gave you an example where people go to hospital and they have to dial 999 because they're not getting the care that they require. They're desperate to
Yeah,
get just care. You know, how simple. You're in a place of care, you're not getting care. Okay. So when you're in that kind of situation, you begin to realize, especially the places and spaces that I travel through, that you need organizations that have a lot better governance and representation. So a lot of the things that I chair is about ensuring that, you know, if you're going to provide funding, you're going to do research, make
mm,
sure you've got the right representation. If you've got the wrong representation, um, what guarantee have you got that your research is even relevant?
yeah,
But we still live in a world that for some conditions there's a lack of representation, for others fantastic, absolutely fantastic, you know, they
yeah,
don't even think twice. But for sickle cell, it's not good. Now when we begin to get that representation, solutions come from that representation. So when you look at boards, for example, I work with a lot of boards, the important stuff goes to boards, okay, and boards monitor that important stuff. What you cannot measure, you cannot manage. What you cannot manage, you cannot change. So I'm constantly quoting this kind of stuff to boards in terms of change for their organizations and being sustainable in the long term, because that's one of my expert hats: sustainability, corporate reporting.
yeah,
So when you're in that kind of a space, what will make a difference? So there's a whole chapter on what those solutions are. Representation is key. Better leadership is also key. Accountability is key. If you harm someone, the standard response, if you kill someone, is you get punished.
yeah,
You face the consequences. You can't just kill a sickle cell patient and, you know, I don't really want to say sorry. But, you know, that's not
yeah,
right. So accountability, consequences, and if you can inject that into the organizations that deal with healthcare, indeed they have that for many other conditions. Just treat people on that level playing field. I often talk about leveling up, on a level playing field, then you'll begin to bring through those solutions. Of course, each different condition has different solutions. So we have cures now for sickle cell. ACLT are brilliant in that area, you know, stem cell research, making sure there's databases so that people can get matches and
yeah,
can get cures. Now, when you're talking about solutions, again, that's a great solution for those that want it. Some
yeah,
people may not want to be cured. Some people may need a cure. Great solution. You know, so we've got a basket of solutions, but they have to be made available to us. You know, and
yeah,
many are just not being made available. So the book again is that one-stop place to say, we know this. Yeah, you know, look, we
yeah,
know this stuff's available, right? It's
yeah,
written down. So join with us, make it available to us, and and the same way that you make it available to other conditions, this is a really significant condition. We're standing up and saying, what about us? So there's quite a few big things in terms of organizations and research to make these solutions. And let me tell you just one last thing in terms of what does it look like at the moment, the research that's been done. And the research is cystic fibrosis gets 400 times more. It gets 40 times more funding than sickle cell. They get 40 times more funding from the giving of communities, and far more funding that comes from federal basis in America. So America simply said, right, okay, we've got the details, we've got the stats, we've got the figures, we're going to change the law. We're going to change the law that says if you're thinking of funding health conditions, make sure that you're aware, one, there should be proper representation from the people that come up with the idea. Two, better representation from the people that receive the money. And if the people that are receiving the money can't evidence that they've got the correct representation, they don't get the money.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things in my pack of solutions that you can see in the book.
We may have to change the title to the Sickle Cell Guide and Solutions, but we'll see if we can maybe pattern that a bit later. Sticking on the topic of research and also quality of care, do you have or do you know of any research that quantifies the level of care or the lack thereof for patients living with sickle cell?
Yes, so you've got the shape and the sway reports that are global reports, very large reports, and we're finding that across all countries in the world, and I think sway 16 countries, and some 3,000 different respondents, not only people living with sickle cell, but also medical professionals and carers and families can respond. And they are certainly providing direct evidence that the quality of care is poor. We had a hemoglobinopathy review, NHS hemoglobinopathy review. The engagement behind all of that came up with the statement substandard care is being provided to people with sickle cell disorder. We also had what's called the patient review experience measures, otherwise known as PREM, in the UK. It was the largest ever survey of people with sickle cell. And what was found was something like 80% of doctors didn't have sufficient information to provide to people when they wanted to know about sickle cell. And this became the source of poor care. We also found, again, 80% of nurses had no training or less than 1 hour's worth of training in sickle cell. You then begin to realize
Sorry again, Kye. Sorry, you're very, for lack of a better word, nonchalant saying these statistics, maybe because you're so used to it.
Yeah.
80%, 4 out of 5 people in a room are not being given the training needed.
Yeah.
That's a massive concern for any condition.
Yes.
If I broke my arm and I went to a hospital and 4 out of 5 people there didn't know how to treat my broken arm, I'd be in panic mode straight away. Where is the disconnect? What is actually happening?
You've hit a very important point. We go into hospital, people that live with sickle cell go into hospital, and that is what they will find. It's not their expectation, but this is what results in an experience that leads to trauma that results in 40% of people with sickle cell not wanting to go into the hospital environment if they can avoid it. It's so solutions, that's where we focus. We have produced this book. I've produced this book because it is regularly said, right, the problem is that patients don't have enough knowledge. The problem is that clinical staff don't have enough knowledge. However, I gave you an example, and if you think around it, well, Kye just went into hospital not more than a few months ago. He seems to know a bit about the subject. How did he end up, not having the correct care?
Yeah.
Well, then this boils down to my immutable characteristics, perhaps. How can I explain why? Because you don't want to speak and cause umbrance for somebody thinking, oh, that person thinks they know more about this than I do. I'm a god, I'm a doctor. But we are beginning to realize over time that if we can get the right training and education available to people that haven't had it, and these are peaks and troughs, Callum. So there was a time when I know some great doctors that I could reference that made sure that whilst they were here on this planet, all doctors that passed their exams had a question on sickle cell that they could answer. And we've moved into a time where all of a sudden there's very few hemoglobinopathy specialists in the country. I mean, there's barely 40 specialists at the highest level, consultants in hemoglobinopathy, and there's over 15,000 people with sickle cell. And a lot of those people are retiring. So it's peaks and troughs. We've come to a place where those people that are being taught to be nurses, 80% have had no training or less than 1 hour's training in sickle cell. So I do spend time speaking to doctors, speaking to nurses. I need to do that a lot more. But what do you do in those circumstances? You write something so that even if you're not there, there's something people can read, because I can talk to people about a subject, and within 4 months it's gone, unless they wrote it down, etc. If you have some kind of permanent reference point, can use that for time immemorial to assist you, to aid you in order to understand better, to utilize as a reference. So it does come back to the point of, we know that this exists, we know that we need to do better. The book is framed to encourage people to learn more. There are clinicians, medical professionals that have come to me and said, why can't we get a copy of this book to every GP?
Yes.
That would be lovely. It's needed. But again, you've got to write it first. You've then got to get some feedback. And if your peers consider it's a worthy enough tome, and it's sharing some really quite complex medical things quite simply in a manner that befits the language of everyday people, to learn what triggers them on a day-to-day basis, but at the same time is shared between medical professionals, nurses, doctors, consultants. So there's that wider understanding, pulls everybody onto the same page. Excuse the metaphor.
Oh no, I love it. I love a good wordplay, so I'm good with it. Kye, so we will be speaking more about the book and where you can buy it, etc. One thing again that stood out to me in the book, and you speak about it in the book, is some of the stuff that someone like me takes for granted. Now, I fall asleep on my arm, you wake up, you get a bit annoyed, you get your pins and needles, you get the feeling back, and then you forget it's happened. But for someone like yourself, falling asleep on your arm can be the difference between having a good day and a day where you could end up in hospital potentially. For someone like myself who isn't a sickle cell warrior, are there any other things or quick examples you can give us that we take for granted, and that could be the difference between a crisis and not being in a crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. So for many people with sickle cell, if your socks are too tight, that can cause a restriction. You can end up in hospital. Okay. If someone touches me with cold hands, I can people with sickle cell can end up in hospital. You know, the number of times I will say to nurses or doctors, I need to warm your hands first
Yeah.
because your hands are very cold. That can just make me worse. So these are things that other people can take for granted. Of course, there's all sorts of things that are referenced in my book: exertion, getting very, very tired, stress,
The weather.
even just going swimming, you might take for granted. Yeah, I'm just going to take a paddle, or I'm down to Brighton or any other place of your choice. I could choose to go to many similar places, and you will just, oh, it's a nice enough day. I'll walk in. Yeah, I could do something like that. A cold wind blows, and I'm very, very ill. People with sickle cell can get very, very ill just from that kind of thing. Now, the distinction is serious. So I can remember a time of being in a shower in student accommodation, and the shower was linked to the kitchen tap, and somebody didn't realize someone else was in. I was in the shower, the tap goes on, the water goes cold.
Yeah.
I've got an exam to go to. Yeah, I'm not going to make that exam because cold water. Yeah, and so these are the sorts of just a few things, hopefully, in response to the point that you make. There are really so many, and
Yeah.
so long as you can manage those things, forewarned is forearmed. Yeah, it's there, the triggers, etc. There in the book. Forewarned is forearmed, and also do other things. You learn to eat healthy. One of the things that used to trigger me was cold. Very much, going out to play in the cold.
Yeah.
I get unwell. I used to play football a lot, dance a lot at quite a high level, but you have to manage that. Really good drinking. You learn drink lots, be really well hydrated, breathe well. If you're going to do any kind of sports, be aware of your breath. Also, be aware of the when you need to have a rest. And this takes me into so many different areas. They cut the number of deaths in the American army through people with sickle cell trait now. Okay, and they said, "Oh, let's give everybody a dog tag," and it says that the person with sickle cell trait. You can't actually do that because it then begins to isolate some people from others.
Yeah.
Oh, you got that. You can't do that. So what they did is they said, when there are high amounts of physical exertion, stop, take a breather, get a drink. Okay, all of at the same time. They did this across everybody. A particular very senior soldier found all of this out. Ended deaths. And we still hear of deaths in this country where people are yomping across the Brecon Beacons and overexertion, and people die. And we had a number of black soldiers that were training in the UK where that happened to. So you've got to be aware of these sorts of things. It's a wide issue. We've got to be able to manage them. But when you have sickle cell and you get ill through just leaning on your arm, all right, or being kind to someone, you say, "Oh, you just lean on my arm," and your arm gets tired, and you get the pins and needles. That could be the difference between me being able to attend a wedding, people like me being able to attend a wedding or an event or not.
That's again crazy, because it does make me think how many things I take for granted. Like, for example, if I got cold hands, I'll go and prank one of my kids. I'll touch their cheeks and have a little laugh with it. I'm a prankster by nature, so that's the sort of thing I do. But again, I take that for granted because I can, whereas you can't do things like that. You can't have someone just run up to you with cold hands and put their hands on the back of your neck, for example, just for a laugh, because a laugh can quickly turn into something very serious.
Can
You
I tell you
mentioned
a funny story on that?
Oh, I'm always down for a funny story. Go for it.
It's a very quick one. I was on holiday, and I was the guy that is back in the 80s. the London guy, gone off to Cornwall, and I dove into a swimming pool, and the management there had told me and then we expressly made the point, make sure it's warm. Okay,
Yeah.
so I arrived at the place, I tested the water, it was lovely. Okay, the next day I dove in.
Oh no.
Before I even got to the surface, I was sickling, and
Oh,
an ambulance was called. So these are things that people can take for granted, and I nearly died, just from that thing. And the only thing that saved me, don't ask me how, there was a doctor from Saudi, and he said, because I was in Cornwall, no one had ever heard of sickle cell, and I said, I could barely talk.
yeah.
And the Saudi doctor, he heard my mumblings, and he said, "Yeah, it's lucky I'm here. If he hadn't have been there, and because he knew about sickle cell,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be having this conversation." But there's lots of people with sickle cell. They've got a number of lives, like cats. It's sort of like
Yeah.
you need all these lives, and you kind of survive these things, and you're around to tell those tales.
That is crazy. You mentioned the F word. I'm going to try slightly take us off subject here. Football. Do you have a team that you support, Kai?
Yeah, I always supported Liverpool from a young child.
Kai, you've just made my day, Kai. I know Orin, one of the co-founders of ACLT. He's a Chelsea fan, and Bev, the other co-founder, she's a Man United fan. So the fact that you just said that will I'll go back in the office and I'll have a good little laugh with them about that. I won't ask about Liverpool because if you're like me, we know it's not going too great this season. But me hearing you're a Liverpool fan makes me know you're an even better person than what we already know you are. So yeah, fantastic news. We'll just go back to the book though. In chapter 14, you speak about work. Can you tell us the earliest time that you can remember where you realized that being a sickle cell warrior can impact your work life differently to someone who doesn't have sickle cell? And how did you overcome this to achieve where you are now, which is very high stead?
When I would go into cold environments, I would, like many people with sickle cell, start to feel unwell. So it became a case of how do I avoid that. So the first thing I realised is that I need to live somewhere that's got sufficient heating. I need a car. And so I needed to try and have a job that would protect me in that kind of way. So certain jobs weren't necessarily right for me. But when you think about those sorts of things, Callum, I can say one of my proudest moments in my life, and I often refer to it, was the day that I worked outside in the snow, setting out buildings, because I was an engineer, a site engineer and site manager. And I used to troubleshoot other engineers because for some reason I could correct some of the things that others would do. So I used to be called upon from time to time, and I was called upon, and I worked the day in the snow. I wrapped up warm, I drank lots of water, but I managed it. And this site manager said the nicest thing I'd ever heard. He said, "Kai, this is the coldest day I've ever worked." And that has always been my badge of honor. So we can manage all sorts of circumstances, but I'm a realist, as I said. I wouldn't want to do that by having the type of job where I didn't have the choices. So I made a conscious decision that I needed to work where
Yeah.
I could be in an office more often than not, or be in control of my own destiny. By having my own company, which is what I have now. So yeah.
And that's a
So you
smart
have to
point.
manage these things.
Yeah, I agree. I'll be honest, I don't have sickle cell, but working outside in weather which we're experiencing now or in snow, it literally and figuratively sends a shiver down my spine because I couldn't do it. back to the book though. The lack of education and knowledge on sickle cell disorder across the world, not just the UK, but across the world, it makes the book a must-have. And look, again, I have the book. I've read the book. As someone who knows a decent amount about sickle cell because work with ACLT, it's enlightened me to so much. I'm lucky enough to have it. Where can others find this and buy it?
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight one of the cruxes of our problems for some people, and that is that some sections of society are treated differently. It's addressed very much in the book in the most constructive of ways.
Yeah.
It can really have an impact on everybody's health, even from mental health, all sorts of people. But there's just sections of society that are often treated differently, and that was the point I was making. Doesn't matter how knowledgeable I may be.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, as I said at the sickle cell inquiry, this immutable characteristic has a big impact. And the book seeks to address all of this to have a level playing field. Now, you can get this book that has been Lancet reviewed. And I was so fortunate that the Lancet saw fit even to look at it in the first place, let alone to have a good review, a 5-star review. And you can
Sorry to
see,
cut you, Kai. Tell us a
yeah,
little bit about the Lancet, because again, many people might not know just how impressive that is. They might hear the word Lancet and just think, "Oh, it's just a normal review." It's not just a normal review. Once again, you're being humble, and I need you to ramp it up. I need you to tell us why the Lancet review is so important.
I'll tell you. So you can get the book on Amazon, and I know that we'll be able to share the link with you.
Yes.
And you can also access my website, and that is www.sicklecellchair, all one word, sicklecellchair.com. Now, the Lancet as a magazine is the Rolls Royce of medical magazines. It's the most highest revered academic publication of all of them at this point in time, and has been for many decades, if not centuries. So that's 2 centuries now. So we have a book that they peer review through their experts, and eventually moves on to the point at which somebody gets to write about the book. So it is very, very humbling to have such a highly revered, well respected magazine as that to say that the book is good. Let's keep it as simple as that. It
Yeah.
kind of says a bit more than that, but to say the book is good, because it means that I can share with you something that you can have a degree of trust in. And so there it is. And as many people that can reference this book, the better, because I wrote it as a public for good in many ways. It's to help the wider society in a space where nothing had really been done before, and perhaps the Lancet recognised that. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you a bit about the Lancet as well.
No, it's the least we can do. Um, the last question I'm going to ask before we finish, and thank you again for being so generous with your time and sharing your experiences, etc. As I said, it really has been eye opening, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. The book is dedicated to your 7-year-old son Zane. Is there anything you'd like to say about him to anyone who's listening or watching?
Thank you very much, Callum. This is hard as a father,
Mm.
because Zane was my son. And Zane was a fantastic supporter of people living with sickle cell. He used to take time out from his weekends to fundraise for the cause. And this is Zane beside me. You can see Zane.
Yeah.
And Zane was killed when a deadly nerve agent infused our home during the 2014 floods. And there's never been any proper investigation. It's simply been avoided to this very day. And in what elected officials call a cover-up, I'm just making sure that we get a legacy of truth for Zayn. So anyone that is willing to support Zayn, who this book is dedicated to, would sign Zayn's petition for truth. 118,000 signatures have already been positioned for Zayn to get the truth through what will be an independent panel inquiry. And as I say, once Zayn gets that truth, that will be a legacy for him, so that how he died is recognized and acknowledged correctly, and also for the protection of others. And this is a means, in terms of a dedication for Zayn, to play it forward. The love that he gave to us and the people with sickle cell is one of his legacies, and this is perhaps what we can do for Zayn. And the Lancet were very approving of Zayn's story, and you can find out more about Zayn on Zayn's website, which is simply www.truthaboutzayn, all one word, .com, and Zayn is spelled Zane, truthaboutzayn.com. Thank you, Callum.
No, again, thank you for sharing that. You didn't have to do that. And we know we're going to be supporting that. Anyone who's watching or listening, please do follow and click all the links in the description to the various websites, and not only buying the book, but also signing that petition as well. I think that's very important that we all get behind that and highlight that and get some sort of justice out of this situation. But Kye, I don't say this often, but this has been one of the most informative conversations I've ever had. Truly blown away by you as a human being, truly blown away by the work you're doing. Bev and Orange speak so highly of you, and the work you're doing is going to be a legacy for generations to come. So on behalf of, I believe, everyone, not just the sickle cell community, but everyone, thank you for what you've done here. And thank you so much for joining us on the Real Talk podcast. Is there anything you'd want to say before we sign off?
I'd like to thank you very much for allowing me to have a voice on your platform, Callum. I'd like to thank you and your organisation. And I'd like to hope that those that get an opportunity to see this stand up, take the call to action. It's long overdue, decades and decades overdue, that it's time that we have a healthcare service that provides good quality healthcare for people with sickle cell disorder, and to share this amongst the public, because it is an understanding that the public are hungry for as well, in terms of people that are here that are very much more specialist, like yourself, Callum. But every day is a school day, and I thank you for the opportunity of being able for me to share what's inside this noggin there with you all.
No, absolute pleasure. And again, thank you so much. And I don't think this will be the last time we do this. I do think we should keep this conversation open, and hopefully we can do this months or years down the line again, hopefully with more success this time and some real change happening at the top, which hopefully will trickle down. But everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening. This has been the latest episode of the Real Talk podcast. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Until we see you next time, thank you and take care.